stuff this summer, and so I'm down my rabbit hole of books and YouTube videos, and someone I came across someone who had mentioned your stuff that was very, very helpful, and then that reminded me that Jimmy had your first edition of Running Rewired, and so then I went on and got the second edition, and I was like, hey, now that we've got this podcast rocking and rolling, why don't we reach out and see if we could get you on to have a conversation to talk about all things running and getting rewired, and see if we can help some of our fans, because we do have a fair amount of high school coaches that listen, and then also just we covered the gamut in terms of guests. We do running, we do college sports, cross country, track and field, wrestling. We've done some MMA. We've done psychedelic research for post-traumatic stress. We've had Jimmy's a film student graduate. So we've had directors, we've had producers, we've had actors, we've had Bigfoot professors. So you name it, we've like I said, we've got at least one guest that probably covers a topic from all over the gamut. So we are honored and stoked, and yeah, look forward to digging into your work. I really appreciate all that you've done and how you've helped myself and some people in need out there. So thank you.
No, I'm happy to help, man. Yeah, I mean, I do a niche of a niche of a niche, but yeah, if I can, if any, all my garbage bag of stuff can be helpful to you and your audience, yeah, ask away. Happy to help. So
We call it a toolkit, not a garbage bag.
yeah,
So
sounds like, sir.
yeah. All right, so we are live. We're back in the saddle. Jimmy's off of his world travels back from Europe, so we are rocking and rolling with the live stream again. And tonight we are honored and excited to talk to a guest who is an author. He is a professor, right? Would you say you're a
Yep.
professor? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, he is a physical therapist. He is a CEO. You name it. When it comes to running and getting people healthy and getting them back to running well, running faster, running healthier. Jay is the man when it comes to that. So if you haven't gotten his book, his second edition is fairly hot off of the presses. So go check that out. But tonight we are joined by Jay Dicharry. Jay, welcome to Airey Bros Radio, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Rich and Jimmy, thanks for having me. I'm going to be here.
Yeah, so we are excited. Like I said, bit of an injury this summer. My own doing, my own ego gets in the way sometimes, as you probably know, working with runners or endurance athletes or athletes in general. Sometimes the our worst enemy is the 3 inches between our ears, and so I was digging in, trying to figure some things out, and I ran across the YouTube video that someone had mentioned your book, and I knew that Jimmy had a copy of it that he had shared with me a while back when we were out living in Colorado, and so I started digging into that, and so I saw that there was a second edition, so I figured maybe we could start there and uh, talk about the book itself and the differences and what's new and exciting in the second edition.
Cool. Yeah, I think the main thing I think I really try to get across in the first edition is, let me back up for a second. I mean, I think the whole goal is just to give people, tools to prepare themselves for the sport they want to do, right? That's all. That's the only reason I get out of bed every morning is to help people achieve what they want to do to succeed, whether it be a student, whether it be, in PT school, or whether it be, a runner, or whether it be one of the US ski team members, whatever, right? So, I'm just here to help out, and I think the goal is, there's such a big emphasis on all kind of just, garbage bag or whatever is trending on social media these days. But, I'd say that you said one of the biggest enemies is what's between our ears, and I agree. But I think the biggest enemy is just like thinking about preparing smart for the things you want to do. And I think we lose sight of that, right? We're so goal oriented, achievement oriented. And I really want to help people step back and say, wait a second, if I want to have this goal, which is great, like I'm all for that. I want every goal you think is important to you is exactly what I want to help you do. But how do you prepare for that goal, right? That's the big question. I think that if we can answer that question for everyone's goals, and I think your success just skyrockets.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before I almost forgot, but before we get any further, um, give everyone your socials, where you want people to find you, where you want people to find the books, the MOBO, all that stuff before we get into it, before we get any further, and Jimmy and I forget. Um, the floor is yours. So anywhere you want people to find you, let them
Yeah,
have it.
thanks. Yeah, you can find a few places. On Instagram, you can find me at just at Jay Dicharry. You can follow mobo.board is where I kind of put most of the little techie stuff people love to learn and follow. And then I also have a blog called anathletesbody.com, which it needs a lot of updating lately, but there's a ton of valuable info in there. And then yeah, moboboard.com is also a place. There's tons of info on there. There's some articles and so forth in the past. So, and then Running Rewired can be purchased anywhere worldwide, right? Everywhere major books are sold. So it's all over the place. And yeah, happy to put out some tools and knowledge to help people do what they want to do.
Jay, with the book, with being a professor, with the MOBO board, what is your main goal? What do you hope your mark is that you leave on the running community?
Yeah, I think, I joke about this sometimes, but it's 100% true. I think everything I've ever done professionally has been done out of frustration, right? Like, I'm so sick of doing the same thing 5,000 times over again, right? And it's like I thought, how can I help people understand what, this problem is, and how can I produce tools to help people do this better? And so, for the book, I mean, I've written a few books now, and they were all born, a lot of the running books are more physiology based, which we need that 100%, right? To help people understand how to train. But there's very little in the realm out there for biomechanics of running. And back in, geez, what, 2006, when Anatomy for Runners came out, there was essentially nothing, right? You could read a biomechanics textbook, or you could, talk to your coach who was, raised in the 60s, and he would tell you, whatever Nike told him way back when, right? And that's not helping anybody. So I took a stab at it with Anatomy for Runners. That was not a very approachable book, but it wasn't really meant to be a poolside reading type book. But then, Running Rewired first edition was written to try and take a lot of those topics in there and make them much more tangible and give people actually plans, right? I mean, I find that there's a lot of people really do want to understand what their issues are and understand the problems and understand what's going on. And then I call us, type A people, right? And we have type B people who are just like, tell them what to do, right? And I don't care which one you are. Obviously, both can succeed, but both, Anatomy for Runners is written for the type A person. Running Rewired will answer both, right? I've got tons of helpful information, knowledge, and kind of biomechanic principles and guides and things, but um, it's if you don't want to read all that, you can just basically just read the plan chapter and then just hit play and go. So it's much more actionable. And then MOBO board came out. For those of you who hadn't heard about this, it's a bona fide rocker board. So wobble boards tilt in all directions, right? The rocker boards tilt in one, and I find that wobble boards are actually too complex, right? When you try to work on balance and stability work, half the time I see people doing just absolute stupid stuff, and their arms are out and they're flying a plane, they're just wobbling all over the place, and like that's not helping you achieve like local control around your foot and ankle. And so you want an environment that's unstable but not too crazy. And then there's a cutout for your little toes in there, so you can't cheat and use muscles in your shin. You have to use muscles inside your feet. So it's just designed to work with your anatomy to give you a better environment in which to train. Because again, I got sick of seeing so many foot and ankle injuries, and you can talk all day about what to do, but at the end of the day, doing exercises like short foot and towel curls and marble pickups are not effective. And most importantly, don't translate into your sport, right? That's not helpful, right? So, people, if you've ever been to a gym and you're doing stuff with a TheraBand and sweeping your foot back and forth in different directions, that might be nice if you've been in a boot for 6 weeks, been immobilized, right? But you probably want to get back to doing some type of weight bearing sport, which requires you to stand on a single leg and put a lot of force down to the ground and run and cut and jump and hop and everything else. And so I have to prepare you for that. So let's push you in an environment that does that in a way that again will give you tangible improvements that are going to translate into things that you want to do. And that's the whole thing. It's like I have to make whatever it is I'm asking people to take time to do, it has to get transfer and success in their sport, or else why waste your time, right? We want things to be goal oriented. It goes back to having that plan.
Jay, I want to put a pin in the board because I want to come back to that, but I want to get into the biomechanics of running and the lack of coaching in that area, um, especially back, maybe it's getting a little bit better, but when I was in high school, when I was in college, like that wasn't a thing that coaches really addressed or analyzed. And it seems like, and I know I've listened to one show you were on, you were talking about your swimming background, where in my experience, a lot of swim practices, a lot of that is like technique driven, and there's definitely a technique to it. Um, and I feel like that's just something that is so neglected from running, and that's like, well, I know how to run. Everyone knows how to run, but it is a skill, and there's that art of teaching the skill that I think is not being addressed. But then when we're addressing it in the book, it's these older people who had they done it earlier on or had it been coached to them earlier on, maybe we wouldn't have some of these running related injuries or issues that we have. But it's almost like we've got to get people to take a step back. That's what I find too is difficult with competitive runners, is to get them to take that step back and like we've got to do these things before we can take some step forward. Do you have similar experiences that with that? Like the higher the level of the person, the harder it is to get them to dial certain things back to fix the problems.
Well, I find so yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, I think that it comes back to what's the persona of the athlete, right? There are athletes who are like what I call focused, and you can say do this, and they will do that harder than anybody else, right? And then there's the what I call the curious athlete, which is like, hey, what if I try this? What if I try that, right? And then they're willing to be open to that conversation from day one, right? And they're always looking for that, hey, let me try this, right? And some people are nervous to do that. And I get it, right? Because you don't want to make big changes at certain times of the year, and that's obviously valid. But I think to answer your question, it's interesting because what happened, like I'm old, right? So this is a lot of this. I'm going to kind of mention a period which some of you may remember called like the barefoot revolution, right? So this is probably 15 years ago, and people started talking about minimal footwear and all this stuff. And so, it was funny because it's the first time ever there was like the entire community, everybody from you guys to like New York Times is willing to have a conversation, say, wait a second, let's talk about this, right? And that never really been done before. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, barefoot running failed, right? Because look, there's maximal shoes out there. And I'm going to say, look, barefoot running didn't fail. Got people to ask questions and to kind of take a step back and look at what the hell are we doing and why are we doing it, right? And so, a lot got confused and muddy during that time, right? So it was a time when people started to have a conversation, say, what is optimal form and what's it look like? And then what you've got is a bunch of people saying, oh, well, don't heel strike and don't do this. And your cadence has to be exactly this. And if you don't fit these boxes, then it doesn't work, right? And you had a bunch of runners getting frustrated. And that to me is like one of the things where the message that got out in the media failed the population, right? Like I don't think everybody in the world should be behind the idea that, hey, we want to improve our movement quality, right? Like nobody's going to disagree with that, whether it be running or pole vault, right? I mean, there's some aspect to technique, but we've lost sight of the end goal, I think, as far as what the message is, right? And the end goal is how can we help our athletes succeed? And to do that, it does take a little bit of a reflection on how are we moving, right? And so there are ways that definitely result in better running economy, right? And some people say, oh, well, I read this study, it shows this. It's like, okay, that study was done, look at the demographic. Who was it done in, right? Was it done in a group of, 10 collegiate athletes all on the same team, and all they told them was one cue, right? And so you don't know that those athletes' movement history, they're not you, right? So like let's dig deeper and say, how can we really distill down what better form might look like for you and for your running partner, everybody else, right? So I think it's I think that a lot of athletes are definitely open. A lot of coaches are open, and just as many athletes are certainly closed and blocked off to that, right? And say, oh, I just want to run more. And I go back to, I mean, look, people always say, I don't, this science stuff is too complicated. I don't want to deal with it. And I'm like, I always go back to Joe V. Hill, right? And Jack Daniels, who are the two most winning running coaches of all time. And you talk to them, and they'll tell you, how many miles do you have to run a week? as little as possible with the greatest possible result, right? And that alone flies in the face of the vast majority of runners out there. Like, I got to hit 80, 90, 120 miles a week. You don't. Like, there's no rationale for that whatsoever. I personally myself have run many, everything from a 5K to a marathon to Ironman to ultras, right? I've never really run more than about 35, 40 miles a week ever. Right. And so again, it just shows you quality can go a long way. And I think we lose sight of that. I think that especially as we get older, right? A lot of athletes as we age think, oh, I'm getting slower, I'll just put more mileage. Why? What's the point? Like, what are you trying to do in that? And I think that, I really try and get down to what does quality preparation look like?
Yeah, we're big fans of minimal effective doses
Yeah.
over here. And the last 100 mile I ran, I pretty much didn't exceed 45 miles a week for a year leading up to it, and still finished in the top 10. So we're when I heard you say that about Jack and Joe on another podcast too. I'm big fans of them. I've gotten to meet both of them, and they are just yeah, I enjoy their work and everything they've done for the sport. So curious, what does it take to stay injury free in terms of, preparation, warm up, cool down, in that minimal effective dose mindset. Is it a daily thing? Is it a 3 days a week thing? Where do you lie these days?
Man, you asked an easy question, huh? Um, yeah, I mean, look, that's actually, I've never heard anybody just say it that simply, but let's talk about this, right? So, I look at sort of two things. And I'll break this down into what I call skill, and I'll break it down to what I call capacity, right? So these words get used a lot, and it's so the first edition of Running Rewired, I really want to get to the point that, look, there is an aspect of form, right? There is an aspect of posture alignment, where your leg is when you contact, how, you drive off the ground, like all these things. I wanted people to understand that, how you steer your body as you run, right? So I made the point earlier, are you preparing properly for your sport, right? Like, postural endurance is really important. And some people say, oh, there's no one perfect posture. And you're right, there's not. Okay. Everybody's built differently. Everybody has a little different lumbar and thoracic curve and shoulder position, everything else. That's fine, right? You're all unique individuals. And just like might have blue eyes or green eyes or brown eyes, that's fine, right? You wouldn't change your contact color, if your eye color, why would you change your running form when you fatigue? And that's something I really focus hard on, right? Like, if you have a certain posture alignment, let's teach you how to maintain it at mile 1 and at mile 26 and at mile whatever 100 of Leadville, right? Like, you need to look the same. Okay. And so I really am very diligent about making sure my athletes can feel proper posture alignment, not just do planks, right, and call it good, but can you check in and find out, gee, am I maintaining my torso stacked up my pelvis as I run? Am I starting to get tired? And are my hips starting to move forward? My lumbar spine is moving back? Am I starting to round over my shoulders? Right? Like, what's that look like? And can you check in? Right? So all the things we're doing are trying to really focus and build that postural awareness. And that's a skill, right? It's not just a strength thing. It's a skill of understanding where I am. Um, Next thing is like rotation, right? While we run forward, there's a lot of twisting forces that occur in the body. It's called a free moment. It's this line of rotational stress that moves up down the body. And so when you contact the ground, yes, your legs in front of you, but it also, your foot and ankle twist in, right? And your foot and ankle twist in, your hips have to twist in, your pelvis has to twist on your femur, your upper body twist in your lower body, right? So improving that rotational control really helps you maintain better stability when you're running, right? Nobody wants to run with me behind you, pushing you side to side, right? It's like that would be ridiculous. Well, if you can't control those rotational forces, you've got a whole lot more lateral oscillation at play, which means you have to work harder to run the same velocity. Like, why do that, right? Let's just kind of put those things in. So I do. I'm a big believer, and again, worked with a ton of athletes. I've had lots of success by putting some time and effort into building that postural awareness, right, and building that rotational control. And that's really important from the skill side. So yes, we do this through exercises, but the goal isn't to get good in the exercise, right? The goal is to get good at controlling the posture awareness, controlling the rotational stability, and those are kind of the skill things, right? And then we talk about capacity, right? And this is in the second edition, something I went into a whole lot deeper and talked about, capacity is like how hard can you hit the gas pedal, right? Without your tissues blowing up, right? And I think it's interesting, runners talk about, don't do too much too fast, too soon. And yes, you can definitely be an idiot. I think all three of us, and myself included, have probably made dumb decisions on our training plan by trying to push things too hard too early. That's fine,
Mm.
right? Everybody makes dumb decisions. But I think that we also think that when we run or when we lift weights, that our body adapts. And one of the big things there's a new chapter in the second edition called Building Better Parts. And I really want to go through, let me help you understand how your body adapts to training because it doesn't adapt the same, right? We have one person, but your one person has different tissues inside bone versus cartilage versus ligament versus tendon versus muscle, right? And it's important to understand that we train those tissues differently, right? Like everybody talks about, oh, it's 3 sets of 10 here. Like that's fine for some things, but not for others, right? So you have to look at how can I boost my capacity, right? For how can I build better bone health? How can I get a more elastic, extensible, more supple tendon? How can I deliver more power to the ground of my muscles? How can I maintain my cartilage health? And those require a little bit different aim for each type of tissue. It's not hard. It's quite easy. I have a plan to kind of hit all these, but it's different for each one. And so you say, how do you maintain yourself healthy, right? You have to hit these. And I think that you can probably glean from this that I didn't even talk about running yet, right? So if you want to, really give yourself the best possible chance of success, you do have to put time in to build a skill. You do have to put time in to build a capacity of those tissues. And so, to do this doesn't take 5 hours a day. Like it doesn't. I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, if I can't just do 2 exercises, then I'm out, right? Like let's be realistic, right? If there was really 3 exercises to fix your running, we wouldn't be in a podcast right now because these 3 exercises would fix everybody and that wouldn't be the issue, right? Like people are getting hurt at alarming rates, right? And I'm on a mission to try and change that. And so it does require some time. And so for that skill aspect, we're talking about maybe, 10, 15 minutes, like 2 days a week. Everybody has that, And then from the capacity aspect, yeah, we're looking to put some time in, right? But maybe, 45 minutes to an hour and a half, 1 to 2 times a week total, right? So 1 45-minute session or two, right? Like it doesn't take that long and it's not that hard. But it does take some, let's say planning, right, to fit that into your training. I understand that. But, I always go back to the stat. I have never put one of my patients or athletes on a like individualized, plan and had them revert ever. Because they see like, wow, I feel completely different, right? Like this is definitely working. I think just give yourself a chance to try these new things out. And even if that means taking out one run a week, right? Going back to our conversation about quality, right? Like do that, give yourself the best chance to succeed. I know you have that one training partner who's putting in 95 miles a week. Fine. Like there are always people like that, right? But the vast majority of people go back to that aspect of quality and put the time and effort on the quality piece and not just so much on what's my mileage per week look like.
Jay, you mentioned taking out one run a week. Have you come across where you have a seasoned runner who running's their main sport, but they're constantly getting injured, where you have to take them from running in general for a month or two because they're getting injured all the time to get strong, to build that capacity before they can go back to running? Or will you be able to do this and run at the same time, even if you are coming off an injury?
Yeah, well, it depends on who they are or where they are, right? I mean, I had athletes, just obviously Olympic year, right? I had athletes who was working with very, close to, let's say, May and June that needed some help, right? So we had to do some things pretty quickly. So you're looking for how to get the most bang for my buck, right? With knowing you don't have much time. That well, I'd love it if people would call me, 8 months ahead of time and say, "Hey, Jay, I have this thing I'm training for. I'd love to get a plan for this," right? They don't do that. They call me a week before, freaking out when their body's on fire. And that's the reality, right? Because we don't take things seriously until we're, get punched in the face. So, it's yes, I've done both. I mean, there are times and place to say, "Hey, look, like I want to maintain, what we're doing right now is not working, right? And running's not bad for you. The stress your running is putting on the body you have today is definitely taking things in the wrong direction, and we need to pull back 100%. But that's rarely happens, right? Like usually 99% of the time, it's, hey, let's drop some running volume. We're still running, right? Because their goal is running. They want to run, right? So I want to keep them running, doing what gets their, gets their wiggles every day. But we got to pull back and say, hey, let's make sure everything we're doing is constructive. And what I do then is I really use running to our advantage, right? So I'm going to give them one or two things, not 12, not 30, right? Like one or two things. Say, hey, look, do me a favor. While you're running, I want you to pay really close attention to these one or two things. And those same one or two things are the same one or two things we're doing in the quote other stuff, right? In the stability work, in the strength work, in the power work, whatever, right? So they build that connection to why am I spending all this time doing other stuff? And they start to acknowledge the fact of like, huh, this makes sense. I can see this play out, right? And then you get to a point where they start to pay attention to these things. They start to feel their form, right? And so I tell them, look, you can now run as far or as hard as you want to with these things in mind, right? And the second your form breaks down, workout's over, right? And they're starting to build. So instead of just saying like all this negative stuff, they start to build that positive association of like, oh, this is what this is supposed to feel like. This is my form supposed to feel like. This is my deadlift supposed to feel like. This is my single leg stance supposed to feel like, right? Like it's all the same message. So we're putting these things in and people can feel things. Because I'm a big fan of shutting up, right? As much as we're talking in a podcast, I'm a big fan of shutting up and letting my athletes go, oh, I feel the difference between A and B, right? And when you can do that, that's when the light bulb goes off, right? And like, oh, wait, you want me to do the same thing I'm running? I'm like, yeah. So I think that that's the goal, right? The goal is to create that aha moment. And if that can be done while keeping running, which I always try to do, then that's what the plan. Rarely you have to pull back, but yeah, I usually try to have people do what they want to do because that's what again, get your wiggles.
And bring it up, you want people to be able to feel, you want them to be able to run and realize, oh, my form's breaking down. Oh, I'm heel striking right now. Do you suggest people videotape themselves in a world that we live in? Everyone's got a cell phone in their pocket, camera in their pocket. Do you think that is helpful? Because sometimes what we might feel might not look what we're trying to go for.
I do. I mean, I think, look, it's seeing yourself do things is tremendously powerful, right? Like it's like, oh, I think I'm doing this. And you watch yourself like, oh, I wasn't doing that at all, right? That's very powerful. But I think that people can get a little overwhelmed sometimes. I think having somebody knowledgeable go through it with you, right, to talk about like what you're seeing and how that really plays out. We've all seen, some person on YouTube trying to break down somebody's form and the lines they're drawing on the screen are over exaggerated and like not helpful at all, right? Like we do this with our students. I'm like, look, the degree of error you have drawing lines on the screen is way bigger than the degree of error this person has in their movement. So do it well, right? So it's why we have fancy tools and we have, I run a biomechanics lab. We have fancy cameras and force plates and our IMU systems to look at all these things quantitatively. And so, yeah, I mean that's if you want real answers, but I think that using video form can definitely help. I think trying to compare yourself to somebody you saw run in Paris probably isn't that helpful sometimes because they're not you, right? And let's actually, can we do a total tangent here? This is something which, like, you know, we live in a capitalist society, can't do this, right? I wanted to film. I was Olympic trials, and I wanted to film so many of my athletes and other athletes. And compare them to some problems we see, right? So I made that point earlier about keeping your torso stacked over your pelvis, right? So again, there's no one perfect posture. Military posture isn't what you should do when you run, but you want to keep your upper body stacked over your lower body. And people love to talk about super shoes, all this like 1% crap here and there, right? Like let's nail the fundamentals. You should be able to maintain your posture alignment throughout your race. And I was blown away this trials, if you looked at semifinals and finals in every event, it was beautiful. Okay. Every athlete in semifinals and finals was doing a phenomenal job of maintaining postural integrity. And I talk about everything from the 100-meter sprint all up to 10,000, right? Like all everywhere in there, right? It was all beautiful. And when I look at what people look like, even 8 years ago, 2 cycles ago, we did not see that. You had people falling apart. You had people's posture alignment changing, and people like, well, who cares? Well, guess what? It takes more effort to run with a slumped body. It takes more effort to run with a lumbar spine extending backwards, right? So this message is getting out there, right? That's what I love to see. Even the people I've never worked with before, I was like pumped, like, oh, this is finally getting some attention, right? So, and you know, running biomechanics is very much in its infancy, right? I mean, like the tools we have to look at this stuff are only like 25, 30 years old, right? This didn't even exist, when I was born. So it was amazing for me to see, the null hypothesis used to be that people train intensity and volume and don't pay attention to anything else. And that's not happening at the elite level now. And so for everybody who's not elite listening to this podcast, I'd say that's your challenge, right? Like they're all doing this and they're doing it really well and they're seeing results, right? Like that person who was third, okay, and doesn't have to sweat the details of, gee, did I maintain my posture alignment or not, right? Could I have gotten an extra 1/10 of a second and got silver, right? Like they know they're coming to the table ready. And so, while you might not get a medal at the Olympics, I want you to still know at your next 5K or marathon or whatever, right? Like you're not leaving seconds or minutes, in long distances on the table because you're preparing properly. So little details that just go a long way. So sorry about tangent, but I hope that drove that point home because it's super, super important. And it was like one of the cooler things I've actually seen in the past, let's say, a handful of years that this stuff is actually making a difference.
Yeah, we'd spoken to Scott Douglas earlier in the year, the beginning of the year, and he was talking about the same thing, that it's just if you're at the highest of level, everyone is doing some sort of strength training, mobility work. They're working on their mechanics, and it's you just can't be at that next level if you're not doing all of those things. And I even made a comment watching the Olympics this year. It's like I don't remember getting into the last like 400 meters of a 5K or a 10K, and there's still being like 6 to 12 athletes still in it, with a lap to go. And it's everyone wants to point at the shoes and the tracks and these sorts of things, but it's like you said, it's the everyone's taking their training to the next level, and they're doing these other things, which is allowing them to be a little bit more durable to push to that little bit of the next level, or to find what that minimum effective dose is, but that minimum effective dose is a little bit higher than the average person.
Yeah, I'll expand a point you just made. It's excellent. This is like one of those you have those moments you like kind of just etch in your brain. There was a time a few years ago I was at a track with a bunch of very well-known elites, right? And they were doing one of the track workouts, and the public was there doing their own workout in the outer lanes too, right? And after, kind of, people came over and were talking to the group I was working with, and like, what type of shoes do you wear? What type of shorts? And I'm just laughing, right? Like, I'm like, you are literally talking to some of the best talent our country has to offer, and you're asking what shoes they wear? Like you have no concept of what type of work these athletes put in, day out to do the type of splits that you just saw them run. And you're asking them what kind of shoes they like? Like, seriously? Like, so it's just, I think people are focused on the wrong thing. And yes, anybody can go buy the same shoes they wear, right? But guess what? Anybody can also put the same amount of work in, and that doesn't cost anything. That requires you to show up disciplined and ready to put in some work. And so, again, like I'm glad you're motivated, but let's help steer you over to the right things to pay attention to instead of getting lost in like glitz and glamour of like the 1% stuff, right?
Yeah. It's like the triathletes that are trying to get like titanium screws and things for their
Totally.
bikes and lighten their bikes. It's like, well, maybe if you just change your diet a little bit, you might lose like 10 pounds as opposed to worrying about, ounces and little things like that.
I had a moment. My first pro race as a triathlete, I had a short career as a pro triathlete, and my first pro race, I'm from New Orleans, right? Like, it's dead pancake flat and hot, and there's nothing to look at. Okay. Sorry, people listening from New Orleans, but it's true. And anyway, I was out in a race in California, and I'm on my, I don't know, it was like a 1980s Italian road bike I had. It was like third hand. I had no aero bars or disc wheels or anything, right? And I was passing some guy who was in like this, carbon fiber whiz bang bike that I was like, oh, that's a sweet bike. And I passed him, I'm like, man, it's beautiful out here. And he looks at me, he's like, dude, we're racing. And I'm like, but it's beautiful though. Like, I'm like, you've lost. If I'm passing you on this piece of junk, right, and you're yelling at me because I'm just enjoying the moment, like let's take a step back, right? So, yeah, people get way too caught up on the gear, and, and, yeah, let's talk about the type of work you're putting in.
Yeah.
Jay, you brought up before some of the things that people can look forward to in the second edition. Someone like me who's got the first edition of Run Rewired, why should I go get the second edition? What's going to be in it that wasn't in the first edition?
Yeah, I look, I'm not a good salesman. I can just tell you, I think that well, there's sort of three things in there. Number one is that new chapter, right, that talks about difference between again building capacity, right, building resilience in your bones, tendons, muscles, ligament, cartilage, etc. So I think it's really important for us to understand that, and so I made the point earlier about that, 3 sets of 10 doesn't get all your tissues to respond the same, right? Like the rate at which you change things really matters. So for example, okay, if you want to do 3 sets of 10 to build muscle capacity, if that, intensity is hard enough, you might build muscle capacity, meaning you're building strength. But to build tendon capacity, you actually have to move incredibly slowly, right? So, and people are like, oh, wait, now I have to do 3 sets of 10 plus I have to pay attention to pace. Yeah, that's not that hard. Doesn't take any extra time, but it does make a huge difference in what you're getting out of that time invested, right? So, I think understanding those nuances are really important. And that way you see one of the workouts, like, oh, we're doing these slowly versus actually we're doing these plyometrics incredibly fast because they're trying to build bone density, right? Those are two different things. And so understanding why you're doing things, I think is important. And so I go into very deep detail about those. Second thing is, um, while in the first edition, I tried to make the plan of like when you put these certain workouts in per week. I tried to make that pretty understandable, but I got tons of questions on, wait a second, I've got this workout and this. So I went through and the kind of planning chapter, I went through and massaged it and gave 4 case scenarios, right? I said, here's a high school runner, here's a master's athlete, here's an elite, here's a recreational weekend warrior, right? And how would you sort of morph things and put things in different schedules so you understand when does my VO2 max session need to go in relation to my plyometric workout or my strength workout or my what I call precision workout, which is more of that neuromuscular skill based type stuff, right? So I try to give us example scenarios to hopefully make that a little more applicable. People can go, okay, I see this how it fits in. So hopefully that's just helpful. And then the other thing I did, uh, I've been around a gym my entire life, right? I started lifting as a kid when I was swimming. And so I understand getting in, getting out, doing the work, putting the intensity in. I find a lot of people at the gym spend a lot of time dawdling and scrolling their phones between sets. And, a big criticism I got with these workouts are taking a little bit longer than the 45 minutes you said they would. And so they don't, but I strip them down a little bit more to make sure people are getting in. And honestly, if you do those as prescribed, there's no reason anybody in the world can't get out the gym under 45 minutes. Usually take about 35-ish to 40 minutes total. And that's from walking in the door to leaving. And then what I did was there's along that way, but trying making the workout some more streamlined, there's now an appendix. So if you've got some issues you've been dealing with on persistent Achilles issues or persistent hip pain or whatever, right? I organize those by kind of by region. So you can go back and say, wait a second, if I want to do some additional correctives, what can I add in for the issues I've got right now? So I try to. It's definitely more of a tool. I always laugh when people show me their book. It's usually not like just you can tell they opened it. It's usually got dog ears and post-it notes everywhere all over it, and that's great, right? I mean, I want it to be a tool, not just a book you read by the pool. So I think it's definitely more of a tool now, and it's more complete. So.
So mention it being more of a tool and people kind of going in there and doing the dog ears and kind of being interactive with it. Do you foresee an app or some kind of online component at some point coming?
Yeah, so this is so I did an app a long time ago. I did an app with Saucony and it was amazing, right? And this is like one of those things where it's like that quote by Steve Jobs, you give people what they need, not what they want, I think, or something like that. But man, it was amazing. We built this thing that used just your smartphone, right? And you videoed yourself doing some things, and we had some, we spent a ton of time and money on this, building this thing out. Sometimes you put the phone on you and did like a little stability challenge, and actually recorded data and it scored you and gave you stuff, and it made an individualized plan for you, right? And like anything, I mean, if you say, what do I have to do? Well, the first thing you say was, where are you, right? I have to do an assessment to find out where you are so know where to start from. And this assessment took like 12 to 13 minutes. And the number one criticism we got from people is it takes too long to do the assessment. I'm like, man, come on. Like, No one can tell you what to do unless we find out where you are. Like if you go see somebody in PT, what's the first thing they do? They do an evaluation, right? If you talk to a coach, what do they do? Let's talk about your race times. Like you have to start somewhere, right? Like I can't give you individualized help unless you do something. So I don't know, that whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. If you can't take 12 to 15 minutes, and the app was free, by the way, I should mention this, okay? If you can't give yourself a few minutes to figure out where you are and where you want to go, like I don't know what to do to help you. So who knows? I'm not saying no, but that experience definitely left me a little sour for people's commitment to their goals.
All right. Well, I guess they ruined it for the rest of us, but now we got to read. But I'll take it. I'll take on the second edition. But at the beginning of the podcast, Rich wanted to put a pin in the MOBO board, but I kind of want to go back there. And when I was looking through your stuff and I was looking at the MOBO board, I noticed it's single foot, right? Single leg at a time. Do you suggest or do you see for most runners that the single foot exercises, the single foot stabilization is better than an indo board where you're doing 2 feet or you're doing a squat opposed to a split squat? The single leg stuff tends to be better for runners.
Yeah, so let's start. This is awesome question. So let me back up for a second and give you a simple situation, right? So many people listening to this podcast have probably done a deadlift at some point in their life, right? So you've deadlifted 100, 200, 300 pounds, whatever, right? And that's usually two legs. So you have both legs on the ground. Your nervous system is very stable, right? And so it's a great environment for your body to push really hard, right? To move a lot of weight. And if I ask anybody, well, think about your deadlift, right? Which you do on two legs, and now we're gonna do a single leg deadlift. Okay. And I love this because this is like one of the screening tests I use to tell somebody, hey, like you have a huge deficit in stability or you don't, right? So we live in a world where if you said, show me your deadlift, and people are doing, let's say, 250 or 300, right? And I say, do a single leg deadlift. The vast majority of you, if I said grab any weight you want to and do a one-legged RDL, the vast majority of you are going to go get like what? A 20-pound kettlebell, a 25-pound kettlebell, maybe a 30-pound kettlebell. Some of you, hard charters may grab a 50-pound kettlebell. Why aren't you grabbing half of what you do on two legs?
Hmm.
That's what I wanted. I wanted the okay, because you just showed me, you just told me without saying one word, your primary deficit is not the fact that you're not, quote, strong enough. You're not stable enough to do that. Okay. And that speaks volumes because the sport you chose to do is one where you have to put a ton of force down on the ground on one leg over and over and over again. Right. So I deadlift around, I don't know, 315 to 350 or so. Okay. If you say, hey, I'm doing single leg deadlifts today, I will RDL with about 155 for not one rep, like multiple sets of 8 to 10 reps. Okay. Because I've built stability in my body to do that. Okay. And so now let's take a step back to answer your question, Jimmy. So when you said what is the difference between MOBO and all the indo boards and everything else, right? Like bilateral, meaning both legs in the ground, rocking and rolling and stuff. It's super fun. It's awesome. I love it. It has a time and a place for sure. I have this thing called a C board at my house. It's my friend's companies. It's so indo boards have a tube they roll over, right? So you can go back and forth. The seaboard actually has a ball, so it rolls in all directions. It's like tremendously difficult. I'm also hugely into surfing and foiling and a bunch of other stuff, and I love that thing to work on general body stability. But that's the key thing. You're working on general body work, right? Like when you take things on single leg, okay, we look at the motor learning research. The motor learning research shows we have sort of three aspects we use for stability when we walk and run. First thing is our foot and ankle, right? So foot and ankle, the very first thing hit the ground. If you have good strategy, not strength, but strategy, you can control how your foot kind of guides down the ground, achieve stability and foundation and control, right? And then push off for the next step, right? Then if you become a little overwhelmed, you start to shift from your hip. It's called the hip strategy. If you become totally overwhelmed, you have to take a step and you kind of widen your balance, right? You've ever seen like an elderly person when they stumble, first thing they do is kind of just go real wide and kind of drop down a little bit for stability, right? So, we're not talking about stumbling when we're old, but which actually there's a lot of merit to training stability work for that. But when we look at, why we do single leg work, on an unstable surface is because your foot and ankle have to know how to roll down on the ground, right? And I didn't make MOBO as the most unstable thing out there on purpose, right? Because I made it to be applicable. If you look at how much range of motion your foot and ankle actually move through as you walk and you run, and look at the axis of pronation, supination, which is just the mobility that your foot and ankle go through as they run. It's a triplanar motion. I built that board to mimic the exact range that we use as we walk, as we run, to build that capacity, right? So I'm trying to put you in an environment which says, hey, your foot and ankle are supposed to move. It's not supposed to be super wobbly and unstable. It's supposed to be a little bit unstable because your foot and ankle do move, right? We don't, people love to say, just train your foot and the ankle on the ground. Like that never happens. We're always moving. Okay. That doesn't happen, number one. And number two, again, this is really interesting. I did a research study I published back in 2009, I believe the study came out, but we looked at how much demand there is to the foot and ankle as we walk and run. And when you are in mid stance, right? So if you basically are running, right, you think about your foot contacts the ground. When you're in mid stance is when your body weight's totally over your foot and ankle. It's the highest load throughout the entire body. But the interesting thing was, probably heard the analogy, what puts out more force per area? A woman in high heels versus an elephant, right? Elephant's big and heavy, but they have a huge foot, right? Woman in high heels, not big and heavy, right? But they have a super tiny stiletto point they put that load through. And so when you run, peak forces in the foot and ankle actually occur just after the heel actually came up off the ground, right? Not while the whole foot's in the ground. So I'm trying to really build control of the forefoot, not so much what your ankle is doing passively on the ground, right? Your heel is doing passively on the ground. I want to build that forefoot control. And MOBO trains you to put force, from the rear foot over across the ball of the foot and out to the big toe, right? That's how the center of pressure moves as we walk and run. And so I mimic that in the design. Everything's very, very, very intentionally. It's a piece of bamboo that rocks back and forth, but it's a lot of thought went into again mimicking the way we stand, walk, and run and stabilize. And so it's designed to build that skill to teach you how to get center of pressure from the heel, right? Across the outside of the foot, across the ball of the foot, out to the big toe, because that's what happens when you run, right? And again, running is just throwing a bunch of elastic energy around from joint to joint. That's all it is, right? And so if you can have good stability, then you can get that elasticity to transfer through your body very well. If you don't have good elasticity, you wind up leaking a lot of that stored energy, and then you're not getting, again, your running economy suffers, right? Your muscle imbalances kind of creep up. You have a lot of co-contraction going on, and you increase the risk of injury. So I want to help you be, efficient, and I want to help you be resilient, and that comes from again building better stability and building better capacity. So that when I say, hey, let's do a single leg deadlift now, right? Your body is like, huh. I'm confident that I can hold this load and I'm stable, right? That's the sensation I want you to have. I want to give you confidence. I don't want you to feel delicate. I want you to feel empowered to do what you want to do.
Well, now, Jay, I just got it figured out. You gave me my light bulb moment. Now I know how I get out of doing conventional deadlifts. I just say I need to be working on my my single leg RDLs from now on, and I can not put as much stress on my lower back sometimes. Um,
Totally.
Yeah, I'm gonna start doing that. I'm curious with the mobile board and the wedge, do they work simultaneously, or are there two separate functions to them? Are you using them separately, or do they go hand in hand?
Yeah, so you know what? I'll take your comment on you want to work on more RDLs. Let's make that into a screening test. So if you do a single leg RDL and you do, let's say, 6 to 8 reps, whatever, and I say, hey, um, Rich, where do you feel most of the weight? Okay, and if you said a lot of the weight's on my lateral foot, on the outside of my foot, right? So let's just say for this kind of argument that you're somebody who's rolling to the outside and sort of I call balancing, right? Instead of actually like being proactive, you're kind of more reactive. We need to help get more torsional mobility or twisting mobility through your foot. And I find this a lot, right? So a lot of people I work with have been just staying on the very much on the outside of their foot. And anytime they do anything on single leg, they just roll outward, right? And so that stiffness that you built in, whether it's, joint stiffness, fascial stiffness, muscular stiffness, nervous system tension, right? All those things, right? We need to kind of tell your nervous system, hey, do me a favor, chill out, let your body move a little bit, and let's teach you how to get your big toe down on the ground. Let's wind out your foot a little bit. So I built the wedge, okay, on purpose. It's literally just a little wedge shaped thing. It's about the size of half a lacrosse ball. I built that to help unwind fascial and joint tension on the outside of the foot. And it's just a little mobility tool to help you get your foot to unwind a little bit. And usually it's a pretty ridiculously powerful kind of A to B, right? So I say, do your 6 to 8 reps and do that little wedge for like literally a minute, right? And I'm like, okay, do your next set. And people are like, whoa, I feel way more load over underneath the ball of my big toe. And I'm like, that's what I want you to have. Remember, we said that center pressure is the line of force as it moves through your foot. It needs to go from the rear foot across the outside of the foot, across the ball of the foot, and out through the big toes. Kind of moves in this little sinusoidal kind of S-curve pattern. And so the wedge is all designed to help people get load over to their big toe, right? So if you're somebody who tends to be somebody who balances and stabilizes their outer foot, you need to use a wedge, okay? Now, the cool thing is the wedge gets gains like really quickly. Like within a few weeks, people are usually like, I just notice I'm standing nice and stable and flat, and I feel even pressure across my forefoot when I stand all the time now. Great. You don't have to do wedge every single time, but it's a great way to kind of, again, teach your nervous system that we can get ourselves nice and flat and stable. So that's why the wedge is there. You can also do lots of other stuff with it. You can put it on the MOBO and actually get a little more gain for your it's trendy right now to say the word strength through length, right? So if you're doing calf raise work on a MOBO, then putting the MOBO on putting the wedge under your big toe for your calf raise is certainly helpful because it puts more length through your foot intrinsics. So that's something that's helpful for sure. But the main goal of the wedge was to be, again, help that foot unwinding. And those of you who've done this know it's like very much like, wow, there's a huge A to B. It's not one of those like 1% things. It's like one person told me, I feel like I'm on someone else's foot right now. So it's not a miracle tool, but it was designed to be helpful. The reason why I made that, you can do the same thing with a lacrosse ball, but if you're a women's size 7 and above, size 7.5 or below, just the geometry of the length of your foot with the height of a lacrosse ball doesn't work. And again, most people, when they do it with a lacrosse ball, they wind up moving the ball side to side, which might feel nice as a foot massage, but that's not why I'm doing this. I actually need the lateral joints of your foot to actually mobilize. So the wedge doesn't roll. So it helps you get more of a bang for your buck or bang for your time. Doing it that way. So yeah, the wedge is a great tool. It's more of an accessory, but I think it's definitely a time and a place, and it's helped a lot of people. And yeah, it's great.
Well, it sounds like just from your description and your assessment that you must have at some point seen me run, because I am always supinated on the outside of my foot, and like you could take a pair of my trainers, and especially ones that I wear on the road, and the inner, midfoot is like brand new, and then the outer part of it is almost down to the foam.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because so let's go with that for a second. So if you took that pair of shoes into a running store, right? So some people might look at that shoe and say, okay, you're a supinator, you need to be in a cushion shoe to create more motion. Like maybe, but maybe that's not the issue at all. Maybe you actually have a very flexible and very mobile foot, but you don't know how to stabilize it. So your nervous system said, hey, we're just going to stay way the hell over here on the outside of our foot and keep on going, right? So you can't tell everything from looking at shoes. And people are saying, you want to look at my shoes? Not really, I look at your foot, right? Because that tells me what the reason why you're here is. So, that's why I say, like, use little self checks on the MOBO website. If you just go to moboboard.com, click on the exercises tab, and then there's a video. You can watch it right now. It's scroll down to the very bottom of the foot tab. Click on the little, there's a clickable body, right? And I basically have exercises grouped in terms of foot, knee, hip, and postural control. And click on the foot, then scroll down to the bottom. It says, "Is your foot locked?" And it's a little test you can take, and just do it. It's a little balance test. And basically, you stand on one leg and go, "Where do I feel contact?" Right? Is it on the outside of my foot, like we just talked about? If it is, you probably somebody who would benefit from doing some foot mobility work. Okay. If you say, like, I feel weights evenly split between the outside ball of the foot and inside ball of the foot, you don't really need to do any mobility work. You just have to work on stability. Okay. And if you're somebody who constantly actually falls inward, right, that's a red flag that you've got a lot of instability in the medial forefoot. We again help you drive that big toe down, which driving the big toe down pushes the arch back up again, which puts everything in a better position, which means the rear foot's not going to be in a bad position, which means your Achilles tendon's in a better alignment, right? Which means it can, again, be a nice big rubber band versus having excessive shear and then breaking on that tendon matrix. So, and then issues all up the chain, right? So, again, foot and ankle is the very first thing hits the ground. It needs to be responsible for every one of your parts up above, right? Like, give it some time and attention. It always cracks me up. Like, if we go back in time and talk about, if we were just podcast 15 years ago, we'd say, oh, why do we have to do core work, right? Every athlete now does some core stuff, right? And then next few years, he said, okay, let's talk about the hips. So now most people do something for their hips, right? And then like, let's do squats and lunges and deadlifts. Great. And like now we're finally, the media, right, is finally open the discussion of, well, let's talk about more than just putting a shoe and sock on. Like what's in that shoe and sock? And we put a better foot and ankle into things we're doing. I'm glad, right? Like the foot and ankle are just another body part. Nothing special. It's nothing secret. It's not top secret stuff, right? Like you give the rest of your body time and attention. Why wouldn't you give your foot and ankle time and attention too? Right? Same thing. So, those of you who are not doing anything for your foot and ankle, that's your challenge, right? Give your body equal attention.
Yeah, it's like toe spacers probably one of the most popular stocking stuffers the last couple of years.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and toe spaces are great, right? Like, so we did a study years ago with toe spacers, right? And let's help people understand what they're doing, right? Like toe spacers are a great way to say, you know, Rich, today, let me take your given mobility, stability, everything you've got today, right now, okay, and help you use as best as possible. Okay, so most of us are in environments where we're used to having our foot and ankle kind of squished together in tight, narrow toe box shoes. And if I just widen out your forefoot, you become more stable, right? Like a pyramid is more stable than a skyscraper for just geometry reasons. Okay, but toe spaces aren't going to improve that capacity piece we talked about, right? So that skill piece we talked about. They'll help you move better now, but if you really want to put time and attention in, right, like let's get better. So the example I use here all the time is people say we have to have mobility. Well, yeah, get your 10,000 steps, right? Get your reps, get off your sofa, get off your desk chair, right, and go move around. But if you actually want to build strength, you don't walk 10,000 steps. What do? You lift heavy stuff, right? Like so there's a role for both, is my point, right? You don't have to do everything every single day, but you do need to incrementally move things up the ladder, right? We know overload always, overload's not going anywhere, right? That principle's been around for forever, and it's finally getting I think it's right talk, right credible talk, kind of purchase within the space, right? We have to kind of keep pushing the needle, and everybody starts somewhere. Find out where you're starting today. Maybe it's just doing some mobility work with a wedge. That's fine. It's step one, right? Then we talk about let's train that improvement in foot and ankle control, right? That's step two, right? And then let's talk about syncing your foot with your hip and your core above, right? That's step three. And now let's talk about adding some load behind that. That's step four, right? Like, so when you're doing, 155-pound single leg deadlifts, you don't have to spend a half hour on foot and ankle specific stuff. You've put the time in and you've earned the right to be there, right? And that's what we're saying. Everything's incremental. So you don't have to do everything every day. We're not ever trying to get that piece across because again, the most important thing as a runner is getting you back to running well, right? That's what I want to put your time and attention on. But these ancillary things on skill and capacity are really important to kind of be consistent with all season long. That's key. It's not something we do just in December. It's stuff we do all season long.
Amen.
Jay, that 155-pound single leg deadlift, are you doing that in a trap bar or a straight bar?
Straight bar.
Damn, that's impressive.
It's, but the thing is, it's really not like that's, I mean, I know people might say, but like, it's like, I would say that's normal. Like,
Okay.
like you should be able to like, you know, I'm not, it's a little different, right? Nobody's going to squat half what they do in single leg because we go down a whole lot farther, right? But like for a hip hinge type movement, any deadlift variation, you really should be able to do about roughly half. In fact, some cases even 10% more on single leg. So I know it may be surprising to some people, but that's not hard. Like that's really, I work way harder trying to move more weight, right? And like, and Richie hit the nail on the head, right? You said you can spare your back a little bit too, right? So those of you who said, "Oh, I don't want to deadlift heavy because every time I go above 300, my back starts to hurt," right? Well, guess what? You can get a ton, okay, of core stability work, right? And hip loading, doing a single leg. And the cool thing is too, when I do this, right? So I have a straight bar in both hands, right? And so that load is also trying to what? It's trying to twist my pelvis in. So by doing it in single leg, you also get a lot of great hip external rotation strength at the same time. So again, you're getting a bunch of benefit with one movement. So I would say that give yourself some time, put some work into it, and you'll see it creep up. And again, if you're somebody who's like, wow, I'm on the outside of my foot, take that wedge out. Do a minute before you do this, the single leg deadlifts, and like you'll find okay, I'm comfortable, I'm stable here, and build yourself up over time. You'll get there.
I'm going to get myself a wedge as soon as we get off of this podcast.
Rich, do you have anything else for Jay before we get into the final four? I know we could pick his brain
Yeah, I
all
could pick his
night.
brain all night. I'm just curious, Jay, being at Oregon State, I know you were did some stuff with UVA as well too. Was there ever, or is there ever any cross-pollination with you and the cross country and track programs?
At UVA, definitely yes, a
Yeah.
lot. So there was, yeah, I mean, working there is a very collaborative. At OSU, our I work in the PT department, and our PT program is a satellite campus, so we're not in Corvallis. So no, we don't have any overload there. I do treat some folks here and there all over the world, but yeah, as far as the university side, it's definitely we're a little more pigeonholed.
Yeah. Did you do some snowboarding up in Bend?
A lot,
Yeah.
whole lot. Yeah, I mean, my main things these days, I mean, yeah, I am snowboarding well over 100 days a year.
Nice.
I do a lot of backcountry stuff. I climb about 300, 400,000 feet a year. And yeah, you'll find me surfing a bunch and foiling a bunch. And yeah, I'm just having fun these days. It's all good.
You guys creeping towards winter up there yet? Or no? Still.
We actually have had two snowfalls so far up high
Okay.
elevation. Yeah, not
Yeah.
in town, but yeah, we got a little coating about twice. In fact, my buddies went out just 2 days ago and got about 4 to 6 inches of fresh snow on top of one of the glaciers on South Sister. So yeah, good times.
Okay. Right on.
All right, Jay, it is time for the final four, sir.
All
First
right.
question I got for you. Are you a coffee drinker?
I am not. I'm a tea man.
All right.
Sorry.
How do you brew your tea and how do you take it?
I'm a big fan of black teas, and yeah, man, put a little of that Chobani creamer in there, and I'm a happy person. So yeah, I'm easy.
Are you throughout the day kind of a tea person, or is it mostly just in the morning to get rocking and rolling and then
Morning, yeah, give me a
morning?
little boost out the bed, and then yeah, I'm a night person, man. So getting up out of the bed is hard. I need a little boost in the morning, and then after that, I'm fine. So,
Okay. Are you a night owl?
oh yeah, very much,
Yeah. All right.
very much.
Do you do like a sleepy time or some chamomile or anything in the evenings?
No,
No.
people always talk about, that gradual fade away. I don't do that. I just basically blow myself up every day, and I usually just pass out in a heap in the night. So
Right on.
yeah, I don't have a problem falling asleep. It's usually late, and it's usually exhausted. So
Okay. Right on. Right on. So that leads us into our next question. Jay, do you have any daily practices or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of yourself?
yeah, I mean, I need to do something every day, right?
Hmm.
Like, and almost every single day I need to do something. It needs to be constructive, my body, right? So, yeah, I am not someone that sits still. I'd say, rituals, no. I'm not the person who gets up and cold plunges in the morning, but we have a river 400 meters from my door, and I go surf that most mornings. And the water temperatures are between 37 and 54 degrees, so maybe it's a cold plunge, who knows? But no, I love to go move. I love to go wiggle. I love to, yeah, have some fun. So that's an everyday mandatory thing, and that's not going anywhere.
Right on. Do you have a favorite way to move at this point in your life?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I like to be standing sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it be, yeah, snowboard, foil, surfboard, snowboard. I grew up in New Orleans, but I never saw snow until I was 18, and I was in Virginia and definitely got some snow time in, and I skied. But yeah, I switched to, yeah, a little bit ago and just having a blast.
Right
People
on.
talk about beginner mindset or whatever. I don't know. I'm having so much fun surfing and snowboarding. It's so fun.
Where is your favorite place to snowboard and where is your favorite place to surf?
Favorite place to snowboard, I'd say, is in Broken Top. It's one of our kind of semi-accessible volcanoes here. It's about 45 minute actually half-hour car ride, and then there's either take a sled or skin in for about 6 or 7 miles. But yeah, it's one of my favorite mountains around here locally. It's a good time. It's a beautiful mountain too.
Okay. What about paddling out? Where do you like to surf?
I mean, warm water surfing's great and I love it, but here in Oregon we have really cold water and I'll don a 5'4" anytime I need to and go paddle out. But my favorite place is up in Tofino, British Columbia. We take a trip there every year and it's a great time. I love it up there.
You wearing a wetsuit year round in Oregon?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
You want to live.
yeah. We grew up in New Jersey, so it was like we had like a very short window, like end of August, September, maybe sometimes into October, depending on the hurricanes and stuff. But it is typically, especially for me, I was always thin skinned, so I always had a wetsuit on regardless because I was cold.
Yeah, our water temps here vary between, let's say, 48 and about 54. No
Dang,
matter what time, yeah, that's it. You're not getting much colder than that, but you're not getting any warmer than that either.
right on.
Jay, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Yeah, so music always, man. It's actually one of my favorite bands in the whole world is coming to Bend in a few weeks called Moonhooch. Those of you who've not listened to them, you need to, and you need to go see them live. They're unbelievable. But they're coming to play in about a month, so I'm super pumped for that show. As far as podcasts, yeah, I listen to smattering of things here and there. A lot of what I do is kind of obviously techie stuff from a science side. So I try to listen to things a little more fun, a little more laid back. But and then yeah, books. I'm really not. I'm a slow reader, but I just finished a book called The Mountain and the Sea. It's a really, really, really cool book to blend worlds of the book's about like octopuses taking on like human thought processes. And it blends a lot. It's a sci-fi book, but it blends a lot of very true and accurate motor learning research with like this sci-fi stuff. So it was almost like this very dystopian look at like life and reality. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, Mountain of the Sea, it's pretty cool.
All right. I don't make any assumptions, Jay, but Moon Hooch sounds like a jam band. Am I correct?
Moon Hooch are two horns and a drummer, and they shred.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We will definitely have we have an Airey Bros um playlist from all of our guest recommendations. So I will be putting some Moon Hooch on the Spotify playlist for you.
You need to. They're from Brooklyn and they're unreal. Yeah, you
All
will be
right.
blown away.
So as I'm ordering my wedge, I'm gonna be listening to some Moon Hooch here in a couple minutes.
Do it.
Sweet. Jay, last one we have for you. Do you have a guilty pleasure? I know you're in band. I thought maybe you had a craft beer over there before, but I think you were drinking some tea. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Yeah, man, I binge on cookies like you wouldn't believe.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm somebody who, if I bake a batch of cookies, I'm not eating one or two. I'm eating like between 9 and 15. But I'll go burn them off, so it's all good. So,
Chocolate
Do you have
chip,
a
oatmeal raisin. What do you go with?
oatmeal chocolate chip.
Oatmeal
Yeah,
chocolate chip.
undisputed champion of the world.
Right on.
We could definitely party, Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jay, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for the knowledge and really look forward to checking out the second edition.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and thanks for having me. And if I could just, again, have one parting message, just go challenge yourself, right? Hopefully, put something out here resonated with you today, or maybe kind of pique curiosity, or maybe the single leg deadlift gave you a challenge, right? But pick something, right, and try and make a change because you only get better from making a change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jay, one last time, where can all the good folks find you again on the socials?
Yeah, you can find at Jay Dicharry at on Instagram, also mobo.board on Instagram, and athletesbody.com. That's another one as well. So yeah, pick me out, search wherever you need to.
Awesome. We will put all those things in the show notes for you. And again, like Jimmy said, it's an honor, a pleasure to chat with you, pick your brain a little bit tonight. And yeah, I will keep you posted on how the single leg deadlift is going, how the foot mobility is going, and hopefully we'll get this Achilles tendonitis figured out here in a little bit.
Awesome, man.
I appreciate your help.